This session, we focus on global grand challenges and how science and technology can address these challenges. So indeed, we have been experiencing very difficult times with a series of not only the economic downturn, but also social environmental challenges, including climate crisis and humanitarian crisis, as well as a global pandemic. But at the same time, we see some sort of hopes of the future and working together, especially in the intersection between scientific community and also international collaboration. So we have been preparing this session within this kind of global context of the times that we are overcoming together and working together. So that actually lays the foundation for today's discussion about some of the thoughts and innovations from our distinguished panelists. So without further delay, let's begin with Hartmut. So from your own view, how would you conceptualize the grand challenges?
Of course, first of all, we have to discuss what are the great challenges and grand challenges. And in my opinion, it is to understand ourselves.
Yes.
In order, if we understand ourselves, we can at the end understand how much we can understand. So it's mainly an understanding of how our brain works, how our body works, for instance, and how memory is encoded, and whether we do have a free will. Mm-hmm. What is consciousness? Of course, there already we touch the border to philosophy.
Sure. Yeah. So how would you, what is your thoughts on then how we can actually utilize science and technology or technology innovation to address these kind of grand challenges?
Actually, I think to understand the human body, we have to know each human protein. Mm-hmm. We have to know how many cell types there are. We have to know in which cell type which protein is produced. And we have to know how the tissues are formed and how the organs are formed and then how the body is formed. Mm-hmm. So this would be the sequential order. And because there are 22,000 proteins in the human body, still a lot of work has to be done, and I do not think that this would work without international collaboration.
Sure.
So we have to distribute the task. The Swedes already made a very good attempt by establishing the human cell atlas, and many international collaborators contribute to that. At the end, of course, we also have to know how the proteins changes, how the cells changes upon development and during their function, which is a very important aspects which are difficult to study, in particular in the cellular context. And so we have to still develop methods to investigate all these problems. And at the end, if it comes to the brain, where we have also to understand why do we need to sleep, and how do we encode the memory, it gets really, really difficult. We have to learn about connectivity, and people try to study connectivity by electron microscopic methods, by more and more, but other different methods, using fluorescence techniques and things like this. But this is still we are not even very close to understanding that.
Sure. Sue, would you like to share your thoughts on that?
Well, let me start off from a different kind of an angle. When I look at Industrial Revolution in general, what are the great challenges? My take on this is the great challenges are what is left behind. For example, the first Industrial Revolution, at the end of the day, what do we get? We get pollution from the steam engine, Mm-hmm. And that goes on to the second Industrial Revolution. We also got the fragmentation of society. We've got child labor. We've got slavery and all those sorts. Now in the third Industrial Revolution, we've got loneliness as an issue. There is this downside of the Industrial Revolution that we have not understood very well. Of course, there are many things that we can glorify it, but all this downside is with us now. The pollution of the 300 years ago from the two Industrial Revolutions is still here, and we do not know how to solve them. And the question of loneliness, people are still grappling about it. What is it we're going to do? Now we're into the fourth Industrial Revolution. We've got a nice panel to talk about it, but nobody talks about the downside of the fourth Industrial Revolution. Mm-hmm. I don't think we even know what the downside of the Industrial Revolution is all about. So these are issues, to me, are great challenges because we are going into an unknown. Already now, the three things that I would want to emphasize in this particular context is we are set to be moving into another era of Anthropocene. Mm-hmm. From the Holocene of the 12,000 years that we are able to build the civilization that we've got today, Now we're moving into another era called the Anthropocene, where human beings are beginning to dismantle their own civilization because the disconnect that we've got. And the disconnect to me is about leadership, it's about education, it's about awareness. Anthropocene is one. And in the last dialogue that I had in 2015, when we talk about intelligence, we already been talking then about transhuman, the transhumanists, the post-human. And these are the people who will be a hybrid between human and machine. And they are said to be here around, maybe around in the year 2050, maybe 30 years from now. And if this does really happen, now what happened to us? What happened to our education system? We have not even talked about this. And of course, the very basic about this whole question of colonialization. Could AI be another instrument to colonize other countries that has not got any AI? You don't have to be the person there, only the thoughts, the mind, and through the AI itself, it could be another form of colonialism. And these are the negative parts that to me are grand challenges, because once we end up with this, we do not know what the solution would be. And all of us will suffer in this particular context. I would like to look at it in a very cautious state. I'm not saying that technology is not important, it is, but how do you balance this? The goods and the bads. All the discussion is all about the good, you know. And the other thing, Kyung, basically, when we talk about the fourth industrial revolution, I think it was in the World Economic Forum of 2016, I think. Yeah, that was the first time. And my country hopped into this like something which is, you know, something which is good. Certainly it is good to a certain extent. But 2015, when the United Nations declares the Sustainable Development Goals, 1 year before the World Economic Forum declares the fourth industrial, nobody picks it up. Nobody talks about sustainable development the way we talked about on the Industrial Revolution. And I think the sustainable development is a more humanistic goal that balances what the technology is going to bring about. So without these two coming together, I don't know whether we'll be able to handle the so-called grand challenges from my point of view.
So from your two of you, the discussions, we really need to have a kind of balance between, you know, kind of opportunities from the technological innovation, but also we really need to engage with the different type of challenges, such as the challenges and also environmental challenges. So what about George? So would you like to respond to this discussion?
Yes. Okay. So I've had a shock in the last week because I went to a meeting, a forum on how are we going to convert to green or sustainable energy.
Yes.
And I thought, good, I can do my part in helping save the world. At the end of that part, when I got through this, I was saying, I hope I help make the disasters that are coming not as bad. Okay, so it's a different. So if you look at what's going on, we find there's both tremendous demand for energy and tremendous shock to the climate as a result of that, and great instability in the world. The most of the burning of CO2, you know, fuels that produce CO2, happened starting about 70 years ago. But starting 50 years ago, we had a shock that took us from 2% of the GDP of the world up to 10 or 12%. And then it came back down, and there was another shock. And then when Russia invaded Ukraine, there was another shock. It got up to 13% of the world's GDP. That is really big perturbations on the system. So it's a situation where I look at what's going on, and I'll talk about two other things. There will always be at least two crises going on in the world from now for the next 20 years. It's just, you got to be able to adapt to that kind of stuff. To do what's necessary, we're going to have to spend $1.3 trillion this year, this coming year, on conversion to sustainable energy. And part of that's for clean energy, part of that's for electric transport. I mean, those are big amounts of money. Part of that's for some of the other technologies and so forth. It is really serious money, and it's very hard for the third world countries to get their piece of the pie. It also means, in order to do this conversion to clean energy, we need 3 billion tons of various metals. Do you know how much 3 billion tons is? You could cover, you know, all of Korea with that. We're going to have to either tear up the Earth, or we're going to have to go out and get near-Earth asteroids and mine them. There, when you actually start saying we're going to truly address the problems, you find that it's just a massive situation, and you have a big built-in infrastructure. You got to work hard and you've got to work cooperatively to make this kind of thing. And most people can't adjust to that. They're going to keep doing what I mean, there are people trained to build one coal-fired plant in China every week. They have enough people to do that. So they can keep doing that, but they only have enough people to make one nuclear power plant a month, okay? Now, Korea should have a bunch of more nuclear power plants because China was shocked this year. They found they needed much more energy than they thought they needed. Well, why? Well, climate change, all the top 10 or 20 cities had floods, every single one of them last year. And they all use more energy than you would expect because they had huge heat waves. And guess what? They ran electricity, but they were running their factories more. And so that's the kind of a thing. When you start being concrete, then you can start thinking about what you're going to need to deal with it, because making that conversion, we're making a 5% or so change per year. If we're going to make the conversion in a reasonable time, it's going to stretch out over 20 years, right? So it's a lot of what's going to happen in the future. And that's not the only thing that's going on. At the same time, there are good things that are going to have secondary effects. So there's a big effort in basically making intelligent factories that can make them. And we're going to need them because we need to make windmills, we need to make more solar panels, we need to make electric cars, we need to make a bunch of this other stuff. You're going to have these plants which are going to be supervised by AI and humans, and they're going to be automated, right? And they're doing that. So Volkswagen is, doing stuff in middle China to build a bunch of electric Volkswagens to sell to the Chinese. Sure. You just keep going on. So Michael and I were just at a meeting just before this, in which I gave a talk about the rapid advances in AI and how they're finally beginning to discover drugs, right? Right now, you have a 10 to 15-year plan, and you have a fair number of people employed trying to discover drugs, trying to do clinical trials and so forth. Many of those are going to be replaced by AI systems. So how do I think about what the future is going to be? We're going to have to teach people to be flexible. We're going to have to teach people that things are going to change and that they're going to have to be able to adapt with it, because the jobs in factories, the jobs in drug testing, those kind of things are going to be shifted.
Sure, absolutely. Connecting to this, different type of transformation, including energy transformation, digital transformation is another very important part. So in your very interesting presentation in the previous session, so you talked about kind of socioeconomic disparity in educations. Like digital divide, how would you like to address these issues in the kind of broad understanding of a digital transformation?
You mean this inequity?
Right.
Yeah. I mean, it's a great question, and it's actually part of these grand challenges that we are talking about, the overall inequality. I think one thing that we need to do at the government levels around the world is to be sure and clear that what we are talking about. Here we have been talking about inequality. Inequality is equality is a different thing than equity of education outcomes that I was showing earlier. As long as we don't have a clear common idea what we are talking about, it's very difficult to get any solutions. And this applies also in the government levels. There are a number of governments that are not able to address this issue because people have different views what we are talking about. For example, some people may think that this equity or equality conversation is about access, equal access to good education or curriculum, whereas the others are looking at the equity of outcomes, the fairness of education outcomes. So I think that that's one thing that we really need to do. Then the other one, of course, is the political will, whether we want to do that. Still, again, at the government levels, often it's much more favorable to have a narrative about excellence in education, meaning, educating and raising the academic or knowledge talent in the countries, and then do what is left to educate the rest. And I think now we do know, and this is based on the fairly recent research and analysis, mostly coming from the OECD's data, that the education systems can be redesigned in a way that we don't need to anymore debate whether excellence is more important for the economy of the state or the social cohesion of the countries than equity. That the smart policies can be designed in a way that both equity of education outcomes and excellence of education outcomes as well can coexist simultaneously. And this is the big call, and as I said, the OECD has done a remarkable job in bringing this conversation to the government level narratives, trying to avoid this confrontation of often political debates about equity and excellence. But it's very important that in forums like this and in a government level policy considerations that we have a good understanding what equity in education means. As long as we don't have a definition for that or agreement, it's going to be very difficult to monitor this type of progress or lack of progress. But even more importantly, there will be no accountability mechanisms of holding anybody accountable for this. Like in Australia, what you saw there, nobody is accountable for this because we still don't have a government level agreement and understanding what we are talking about. So that's what is at stake.
Very interesting. So I also think that technology itself doesn't necessarily lead to the accountability in governments. So you also mentioned about leadership, and then you also mentioned about collaboration. So we are actually coming from the scientific community, but how can we collaborate with different type of stakeholders? Because we have local actors and civil society and business sector, private sector, and government. Do you have any thoughts on that? How we can actually collaborate? Sure. So
let me try. I mean, after telling you what the issue is from our point of view, what we have done is basically trying to redefine again what university is and what type of education should we give. Working with the government and the industry and even the community. First thing, for example, all my students in my university will have to understand sustainable development. Everybody must go through this compulsory course, understanding what sustainable development is about. That would be the kind of benchmark that we want them to think about. Whatever else that comes in Fourth Industrial Revolution, where does it fit in the context of sustainable development? That's one. Secondly, all of them will have to work with the community. Everybody must have got a project with the community. We have been so much in the industry, which is nothing wrong, but we also learned when the pandemic comes, the first one to close down was the industry. And they say, we don't need your student anymore, we don't have jobs for you and stuff like that. And who bails us out is the community. So now we go back to the community and tell them how to work with the community, how to profile the community, how to find what problems do they face, and how to actually solve this problem as part of their commitment to giving back knowledge that they've got from the university. And the third one is what we call irresponsible research. In other words, all research that's done in a university must concern the people who are involved. If it's a community, the community must be involved. It's not a way that we just do the research in the lab and then plonk it onto them and say, this is a solution. No. And the community will be part of the evaluator. They will say that your research is successful because it solves my problem. They benefit from our research. It doesn't matter whether we are a tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, when they got an impact factor of 10. My question to them is, what is the impact on the ground? If you've got an impact factor of 10 and you don't have impact on the ground, then your research is still not complete. So we're beginning to redefine this so that people know exactly what you should be doing and how do we actually will, I don't know whether it will, lay away the grand challenges, but at least the mindset has changed.
Sure.
The mindset is not a pre-COVID mindset. We're hoping it is a post-COVID mindset that talks about humanity in the real terms rather than just on a piece of paper.
Sure. Hermit or George?
I think one of the things that we have to teach people is that we're actually in a time period when things are urgent because there are crises and real problems facing it, and that they have to be kind of realistic. They can't say, this is how it should be. They say, what can we do working with government, working with industry, working with the general population to come up with a solution that's going to get us through this bad spot? Everybody has a stake in what's going on.
Sure.
Actually, of course, we have to still to consider the scientists, the overarching scientists, like the one who started the climate changes in Potsdam, and to listen what they tell us, and they analyze the reasons for the global warming, and also find out what is the most important measures to fight global warming. In my opinion, what we have, of course, we all have the technology around to fight global warming. We have to use photovoltaic cells and windmills, and we have to develop energy storage. I'm not a fan of the hydrogen business because when you produce hydrogen, you lose too much energy. I am thinking that transferring energy via the direct electric high voltage current is a much better method. And for instance, I'm very pleased to see that the plan to transfer energy, solar energy from Australia to Singapore has been resumed. And I think that also might be sooner or later that you could become connected to that. Australia is of course very important because when it's summer in Australia, it's winter here. So it just compensates each other, and losses in electricity transport is about 3% per 1,000 kilometers.
Sure.
So it's doable. So in Europe, we should actually revive the plans to the Desertec plans to generate electricity in North Africa, maybe in Saudi Arabia, and transfer the energy to Europe, but not to, in my opinion, not to hydrolyze, to electrolyze water in Africa, but and transfer it via ships or pipelines to Europe, but transfer it by electricity, and then to electrolyze water to produce hydrogen where it needed in steel production places and cement production places.
Sure, yeah. So before we close, I'd like to just give you 30 seconds for kind of finalizing your
Plus
comments.
30.
Right?
You give me
Sure.
plus a minute.
Any comments on this?
No.
Or you can just wrap up. Or
Tell them it's going to be an interesting time.
it's going to be very interesting.
We're going to be living in
Yeah,
interesting
sure.
times.
But let me leave you 30-second
Sure.
thing, because part of this conversation, of course, is how do we fix some of these broken or dysfunctional systems, like education in many ways. I think, too often we think about what should we do next, like what is the next reform or next thing to do, and the alternative way to think of, and I know the colleagues know this better than I do, is to think about what should we stop doing. And there's so much happening in especially school education systems around the world that has nothing to do with the children or teaching or learning or education at all. So education systems around the world have really become like Christmas trees, and there's so much decorations around that you cannot see the function and form anymore inside there. So, if you lose your hope and become frustrated about what to do next, try this one. Like, what would be those things in your own education system or own school that could be removed without doing any harm for anyone? Actually, that would improve the work of the people there so that they can really focus on all these beautiful things that we have heard today. So that would be alternative way to think about solving this problem, rather than try to invent yet another reform that has been pretty much the problem in education systems around the world during the last 50 years.
Sure. With that, it's been an excellent discussion today. So with that, we're going to close our panel. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you.